The evening had been long, but Patricia was used to long evenings. She had been a circuit court judge for 22 years, and in that time she had learned that the law did not keep office hours. Cases ran late. Paperwork piled up. Decisions that would change people's lives needed to be made carefully, and careful took time. She locked her office at 9:30, took the elevator down to the parking garage, and drove out into the city. She was wearing a plain gray blazer and dark slacks. No robe. No badge on the lapel. Nothing that announced who she was or what she did. She was just a woman in a car, driving home after a long day at work, thinking about the cup of tea she was going to make as soon as she got through her front door. The streetlights on Remington Avenue were the kind that buzz faintly and turn everything a pale yellow color. Patricia had driven this stretch of road 100 times. She knew every traffic light, every curve, every pothole the city had been promising to fix for 3 years. She was calm. She was tired. She was almost home. Then the blue and red lights appeared in her rearview mirror. She did not panic. She simply pulled over to the side of the road, turned off the radio, and waited. She had nothing to worry about. She had been driving carefully, her speed was well within the limit, and her car was perfectly maintained. She assumed it was something small, a broken tail light perhaps, or a random spot check. She rolled down her window and placed both hands on the steering wheel, the way she had always been told a person should. Officer Dale Morrow reached her window first. He was a tall man with sharp eyes and a flashlight he aimed directly into her face before he had said a single word. His partner, Officer Cody Brinks, stood a few steps behind, watching from the side. "License and registration," Morrow said. Not hello. Not good evening. Just those 3 words, delivered with the kind of flatness that tells you immediately how a conversation is going to go. Patricia reached for her purse slowly and calmly. As she did, she mentioned, politely, without any edge in her voice, that her judicial identification was also inside her bag. It was something she always did when stopped. Not to show off, not to use her position as a shield, but simply to be transparent. Officers, in her experience, appreciated knowing who they were dealing with. Morrow did not appreciate it. He looked at his partner. Something passed between them, not a word, just a look. And then he said, "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am." Patricia paused for just a moment. She was not frightened, exactly, but she was alert. There was no reason for her to step out of the car. She had not been speeding. She had not been swerving. She had not done anything that would normally require a person to exit their vehicle. But she understood, from 2 decades of watching people navigate difficult situations, that the wise thing to do was to cooperate first and ask questions later. She stepped out of the car. The night air was cold. She stood on the uneven sidewalk in her work heels, and Officer Morrow told her he was going to conduct a field sobriety test. Patricia looked at him steadily. She told him she had not been drinking. She told him, again, that she was a circuit court judge and that they could verify her identity through dispatch in under 2 minutes if they chose to do so. Morrow told her to walk in a straight line. She walked in a straight line, on a cracked, uneven sidewalk, in heels, in the cold, at nearly 10 o'clock at night. She did it without complaint. Then he asked her to recite the alphabet backwards. She did that too. She had the kind of controlled patience that only comes from spending years in a courtroom where you must sit calmly through things that make no sense and wait for the moment when truth finally surfaces. By the time a 3rd officer arrived, called over by Brinks on the radio, there were 3 men standing around Patricia on the side of Remington Avenue, speaking to each other in voices just low enough that she could not quite hear. She caught the tone, though. She saw one of them smile. She saw another one shake his head in a way that was not respectful. She stood straight and said nothing. Officer Morrow returned to her and told her she was going to need to come with them while they sorted things out. Before Patricia could respond, her hands were guided behind her back and handcuffs were placed on her wrists. They were not placed gently. She was put in the back of the patrol car. The door closed. She sat in the dark, in the cold, in handcuffs, watching the 3 officers through the window. They stood near their vehicles. They talked. One of them was on his phone. Another one leaned against the car with his arms crossed, and every so often he glanced at the patrol car where Patricia was sitting as if she were simply a problem waiting to be processed, not a person waiting to be released. 37 minutes passed. Patricia later said that those 37 minutes were not the worst part of the night. The worst part, she said, was the moment earlier, when she had told them who she was and Officer Morrow had looked her in the eye and said, "Ma'am, I don't care what you say you are." Not because it was threatening, but because she knew, with absolute certainty, that he meant it. What broke the long wait was not one of the three officers. It was a dispatcher named Keisha Tran, a young woman sitting at a desk in a building across the city, running routine checks. She typed the name Patricia Donahue into the system. And she saw it immediately. She pressed her radio. Morrow. Her voice was even, but there was something careful in it. "That woman you have in the back. She is a sitting circuit court judge." There was a pause on the radio. The kind of pause that fills itself with the sound of everything a person suddenly wishes they had done differently. "Say that again," Morrow said. Keisha said it again. The three officers walked back to the patrol car together. The one who had been leaning against his vehicle with his arms crossed was now standing with his hands at his sides. Brinks was looking at the ground. Morrow opened the rear door of the patrol car, and the expression on his face had changed so completely that it was almost difficult to connect it to the face that had said, "I don't care what you say you are," less than an hour before. The handcuffs were removed. No one said they were sorry. Patricia was told she was free to go. The words were quiet and a little clumsy, the way words are when people know they should say more but cannot find anything adequate. She looked at each of the three officers in turn. She held each gaze for just a moment. Then she got back in her car, started the engine, and drove the rest of the way home. She made the cup of tea. She sat at her kitchen table for a long time. What none of the three men on Remington Avenue knew, what they had never thought to check, or perhaps simply could not have imagined, was that Judge Patricia Donahue was the presiding judge in an ongoing misconduct review involving officers from their own precinct. The case had been filed 8 weeks earlier. A member of the public had made a formal complaint against two officers, colleagues of Morrow and Brinks, men they worked alongside every single day, claiming that those officers had used excessive force during a traffic stop. A traffic stop. Patricia had been handling the case with the same care she brought to everything. She had reviewed the evidence. She had read every document. She had not yet issued her ruling because she believed that fair decisions required time, and she was not the kind of judge who rushed. What happened on Remington Avenue did not change her thinking about that case. She was too experienced, too principled, to allow one experience, even this one, to color a separate legal matter. The law was not a personal thing. It was a structure, and she had spent her entire career making sure that structure stood firm, even when it would have been easy to let it bend. But what happened on Remington Avenue did do something. It clarified things. The next morning, Patricia arrived at the courthouse at 7:42 a.m., the same time she arrived every morning. She said nothing to her clerk about what had happened the night before. She reviewed her schedule. She heard 3 cases before lunch. She was precise and fair and unhurried, as she always was. At 2:15 in the afternoon, she sat down at her desk, took out a clean sheet of paper, and began writing a formal complaint to the Office of Police Accountability. She did not write it in anger. She wrote it the same way she wrote every legal document she had ever produced, with facts, with order, with dates and times and names and exact words. She included the time she was stopped. She included the reason that was given, which was no clear reason at all. She included the names of all 3 officers, the number of minutes she sat in the patrol car, and the name of the dispatcher who had confirmed her identity. She included the exact sentence Officer Morrow had spoken when she told him who she was. The complaint was 6 pages long. She submitted it without calling a single journalist. The Office of Police Accountability opened a formal investigation 10 days later. The dashboard camera footage from the patrol car, which the department initially described as inconclusive, was sent to an independent analyst. The analyst's report was short and direct. The stop, it said, lacked clear justification from the beginning. Officer Morrow was placed on administrative review. Officer Brinks received a formal reprimand. The third officer, whose name had not appeared in Patricia's original complaint, was clearly visible on the footage and was added to the review shortly after. Their union filed a response, as unions often do. There were procedural hearings. There were character statements. There were months during which very little seemed to be happening on the surface, while quite a lot was happening underneath. Patricia did one more thing before the investigation reached its conclusion. She submitted a written notice to the court, voluntarily removing herself from the misconduct case involving the officers from the same precinct. She was not required to do this. There was no direct legal connection between that case and the officers under investigation. But she felt it was the right thing to do. She explained her reasoning clearly in her written notice. She wanted no one to be able to say, at any point, that her judgment in that case had been shaped by personal experience. She handed the file to a colleague. She moved on. She would not let what had been done to her become a reason for her to rule badly. That, she told a close friend privately, would have been letting them win twice. A reporter at a local newspaper obtained Patricia's complaint through a public records request a few weeks into the investigation. The story was published on a Tuesday morning. By Friday, it had been picked up by regional outlets across the state. The headline was simple: a judge had been detained during a traffic stop, and the officers involved had not known, or had not bothered to check, who she was. The irony of the timing, given the ongoing misconduct case at their precinct, added a layer to the story that people found difficult to ignore. But something happened after the story ran that Patricia had not expected, and that turned out to matter far more than her own experience. Other people came forward. Women who had been stopped on Remington Avenue and other streets nearby began calling the newspaper. They described similar situations: pulled over without clear reason, spoken to with impatience, asked to step out of vehicles for no reason they were ever given. Most of them were women. Many of them were from communities that had long learned to expect this kind of treatment and had long been told that speaking up about it would not lead anywhere. Patricia's complaint, written in the careful, precise language of the law, had cracked something open. And what came out was not her story alone. It was a pattern. A long, slow, documented pattern that had existed on those streets long before the night she drove home in her gray blazer and dark slacks. She gave one interview. A single one. She sat across from a journalist from the regional newspaper in a quiet room at the courthouse, and she spoke in the same measured tone she used when she addressed a courtroom. "I am not unique," she said. "That is exactly the problem. I am a judge with credentials that can be confirmed with a single radio call, and this still happened to me. Think about what happens to people who have no credentials at all. Think about what they face, and how many of them have faced it without anyone paying attention." She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The words were enough. Months passed. A reform measure was proposed to the city council. It introduced new requirements: clear justification before detainment, mandatory identity verification before the use of handcuffs, updated standards for body camera footage. The council passed it after 2 rounds of debate. It was not named after Patricia. She had asked specifically that it not be. The misconduct case that Patricia had removed herself from was eventually heard by her colleague, Judge Sandra Okafor. Judge Okafor ruled in favor of the person who had filed the complaint and ordered a departmental review of how force was being used during traffic stops. It was a careful ruling. It was fair. It was exactly the kind of ruling Patricia herself would have worked toward. Officers Morrow and Brinks eventually returned to active duty, with conditions attached to their files that would follow them through the remainder of their careers. The third officer received a longer review period. The union appealed several of the findings. Some of those appeals succeeded. Others did not. The legal process, as Patricia had always known, was slow and imperfect and sometimes deeply frustrating, but it moved. Patricia Donahue continued to arrive at the courthouse at 7:42 every morning. She continued to hear cases. She continued to issue rulings that she had thought through carefully, that she could defend on the merits, that she was not ashamed of. She did not become bitter. She did not become loud or dramatic about what had happened to her. She did not wear it on her face or bring it into her courtroom. What she did do was remember it, precisely, completely, and permanently, the way a person remembers anything that shows them something true about the world they live and work in. On the street that night, 3 officers had decided that a woman in a gray blazer driving home from work was not worth listening to. They had decided, without checking, without asking, without pausing for even a moment to consider that they might be wrong, that they already knew everything they needed to know about her. They were wrong. And the most powerful thing Patricia Donahue ever did about it was not the complaint, not the interview, not the reform measure that passed because of the attention her case helped bring. The most powerful thing she did was go back to work the next morning and keep being exactly who she had always been: quiet, precise, fair, and completely unmoved from the belief that the law, when it is applied correctly, does not ask who you are before it protects you. It protects everyone. That was the point. That had always been the point. And on the morning after the night on Remington Avenue, sitting at her desk with a cup of tea going cold beside her and a blank complaint form waiting in front of her, Patricia Donahue picked up her pen and made sure the point was not lost.